The earth had been screaming for 3 minutes straight when Nora Kennedy realized she might die alone in the darkness beneath her family's homestead. She pressed her hands against the rough wooden ceiling of the cellar, dirt and debris raining down between the slats as the tornado tore across the Colorado plains like the wrath of God himself. The wind howled with such fury that she could feel it in her bones, a primal terror that made her want to curl into a ball and weep. But Nora Kennedy had never been one to give in to fear, not when her father died of pneumonia 2 winters ago, not when her mother followed him 6 months later, and not now, even as everything she owned was being ripped apart above her head. The sound changed suddenly, from a roar to a series of crashes and splintering wood. Her house, her barn, everything her parents had built was being destroyed. Nora crouched lower, covering her head with her arms as dust filled the small space. She could taste dirt on her tongue, feel it coating her throat. The mason jars of preserves rattled on their shelves, some falling and shattering against the packed earth floor. The smell of pickled vegetables and peaches mixed with the musty scent of the cellar. Then, as suddenly as it began, the screaming stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. Nora stayed crouched for several long minutes, her heart hammering against her ribs, waiting to see if the tornado would return. When nothing happened, she slowly straightened and reached for the cellar door above her head. She pushed. It did not budge. She pushed harder, throwing her weight against the wooden door. Nothing. Something heavy had fallen across it, trapping her inside. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced it down. She was 22 years old and had survived on this homestead alone for months now. She would not die in this hole. "Help!" she screamed, pounding on the door with both fists. "Is anyone there? Help me!" The only answer was the wind, gentler now, whistling through the destruction above. Nora tried again and again, shouting until her voice went hoarse, pushing until her shoulders ached. The cellar had no other exit. Her father had built it for safety, not escape. She had food down here, water in a barrel, but no way out. How long would her air last? How long before someone came looking? Who would come looking? The nearest neighbor was the Hutchinson family, 3 miles east, and old Mrs. Hutchinson could barely manage her own farm since her husband passed. The town of Los Animas was 8 miles away, and Nora rarely went there except for supplies. She had no close friends, no suitors, despite her mother's efforts before she died. She was alone. Hours passed. Nora rationed sips of water and tried not to think about the weight pressing down on the cellar door. She sang to herself, old hymns her mother had taught her, anything to keep the crushing panic at bay. The darkness was absolute when she finally let the lamp burn out, needing to conserve oil. She sat with her back against the earthen wall and waited. Sleep came in fits and starts, her body too tense to truly rest. She dreamed of the tornado, of being lifted into the sky and torn apart. She woke, gasping, disoriented in the pitch black, and had to remind herself where she was, trapped, buried alive for all practical purposes. On what she guessed was the second day, she heard something above. At first she thought it was her imagination, but then it came again. Footsteps, heavy ones. "Help!" Nora scrambled to her feet, her legs stiff from sitting so long. "I'm down here. Please help me." The footsteps stopped. Then a voice, deep and rough like gravel. "Keep back from the door if you can. I need to move some timber." "Yes. Yes, please, I will move back." Nora retreated to the far corner of the cellar, her heart soaring with hope. The sounds of labor came from above, wood scraping against wood, heavy thuds, a man's grunt of effort. It seemed to take forever, but finally light began to seep through the cracks around the cellar door. Then the door itself lifted, flooding the space with afternoon sunlight so bright that Nora had to shield her eyes. A figure appeared in the opening, backlit by the sun. "Can you climb up?" the man asked. "I think so." Nora approached the opening, squinting. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out a ladder being lowered into the cellar. She grabbed it gratefully and began to climb. Her legs trembled with exhaustion and fear, but she made it up rung by rung until strong hands grasped her arms and lifted her the rest of the way out. She stumbled onto solid ground and immediately fell to her knees, overwhelmed. The man steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "Easy now. You've been down there a while. Take your time." When Nora finally looked up, her breath caught. The man standing over her was unlike anyone she had ever seen in Los Animas. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His arms, visible below rolled-up shirt sleeves, were corded with muscle that flexed as he moved. His hair was dark and wavy, falling past his collar in a way that most civilized men would never allow, and his face was weathered and tanned from a life spent outdoors. A thick beard covered his jaw, but his eyes were striking, a clear pale blue that seemed to see right through her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, crouching down to her level. Nora shook her head, unable to find words. Then she looked past him and saw the devastation. Where her house had stood, there was nothing but scattered boards and broken furniture. The barn was completely gone, not even a wall remaining. Her fields were torn to pieces, crops destroyed. Everything was simply gone. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, no, no." The man followed her gaze. "The tornado did this 2 days ago. I saw it from the mountains and came down to see if anyone needed help. I have been checking homesteads along this stretch." 2 days? Nora pressed her hands to her face. "I was down there for 2 days? Looks like it. You're lucky you had supplies." He stood, offering her his hand. "Name is Yates Harlow. I live up in the mountains west of here." She took his hand, his palm rough and calloused against hers, and let him pull her to her feet. "Nora Kennedy, this was my home. I'm sorry for your loss." Nora walked slowly through the wreckage, her legs unsteady. She found pieces of her life scattered across the prairie, her mother's china smashed to bits, the family Bible, its pages torn and scattered, her father's tools bent and broken. She picked up a photograph in a cracked frame showing her parents on their wedding day and held it to her chest. "Do you have family you can go to?" Yates asked, keeping a respectful distance. "No, they are all gone." Nora set the photograph down carefully on what had been her front steps, the only part of the foundation still intact. "I have no one." Yates was quiet for a moment, studying the destruction. "You cannot stay here, not like this. Winter is coming in a few months and you have no shelter." "I know." Nora felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She had cried enough when her parents died. She would not cry now. "I will go to town, I suppose, find work. Maybe Mrs. Patterson needs help at the boarding house. That is one option." Yates walked over to what remained of her barn and began sorting through the rubble. "Or I could help you rebuild." Nora stared at him. "What?" He straightened, a hammer in his hand, miraculously unbroken. "I know timber. I know building. I could help you rebuild your house and barn. Would not be fancy, but it would stand." "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." Yates met her eyes, and something in his gaze made her heart skip. "Because you need help, and I can give it. Because leaving you to fend for yourself would not sit right with me. Because—" He paused, then shrugged. "Because it is the right thing to do." Nora did not know what to say. Men did not just offer to rebuild someone's entire homestead out of kindness. There had to be a catch, some expectation. But when she looked at Yates Harlow, she saw only genuine concern in those blue eyes. "I cannot pay you," she said quietly. "Did not ask you to. I do not understand." "You do not have to understand. Just say yes or no." He waited, patient as a mountain. Nora looked at the wreckage of her home, then back at this strange mountain man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even known how to form. Every practical bone in her body said she should be suspicious, should refuse, should run to town and find safety in numbers. But something else, something deeper, told her to trust him. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, please. I would be grateful for your help." Yates nodded once, as if the matter was settled. "Good. First thing we need is to salvage what we can. Then I will ride to town for supplies. You have any money saved?" "Some, in a tin box in the cellar." "That is good fortune. Go get it, and make a list of what else you had down there that survived. We will need every bit of it." For the rest of that day, they worked together sorting through the debris. Yates lifted beams that Nora could never have moved on her own, his muscles straining against his shirt in a way that she tried not to notice. He was efficient and methodical, creating piles of salvageable lumber, bent nails that could be straightened, anything that might be useful. Nora gathered her preserves from the cellar, her blankets and clothes that had been stored in a trunk, and the few family items that had survived. As the sun began to set, Yates built a fire from broken boards. "You should eat something," he said. "You have been without proper food for days." Nora opened a jar of venison stew she had canned last fall and shared it with him, along with some hardtack she found in the cellar. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. She studied him when she thought he was not looking, trying to understand this man who had appeared from nowhere to save her. His hands were scarred from years of hard work, his movements careful and deliberate. He ate slowly, as if accustomed to making meals last. "Why do you live in the mountains?" she asked finally, needing to break the silence. Yates stared into the fire. "I like the quiet, like being away from people and their complications. Yet you came down to help after the tornado. That's different. That's need, not want." He glanced at her. "I'm not good with society, Miss Kennedy. Never have been. But I know right from wrong, and leaving folks to suffer when I could help would be wrong. You can call me Nora." "Nora," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. "You can call me Yates. Thank you, Yates, for finding me, for staying." He nodded, adding another board to the fire. "You should sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. I will keep watch. You need rest too. I will sleep after you do." Nora wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. She wrapped herself in a blanket, lying down near the fire but not too close. The ground was hard beneath her, nothing like her feather mattress that was now scattered across the prairie, but she was so tired that it did not matter. As she drifted off, she was aware of Yates sitting by the fire, a silent guardian in the darkness. She woke once in the night to find him still there, his eyes scanning the horizon. She started to say something, but he shook his head. "Sleep," he said softly. "I have you." Those 3 words should not have meant so much, but they did. Nora closed her eyes and slept more peacefully than she had since before her parents died. The next morning, Yates saddled his horse, a large roan gelding that suited him perfectly. "I will be back before dark with supplies," he told Nora. "Can you manage here alone?" "I have been managing alone for months," she said, more sharply than she intended. Yates actually smiled, a brief quirk of his lips beneath his beard. "I reckon you have. Still, stay near the cellar. If weather turns bad, get below ground." "I will." He rode off toward Las Animas, and Nora spent the day continuing to sort through the wreckage. She found more photographs, a quilt her grandmother had made, her father's pocket watch still ticking faithfully in the ruins. Each discovery was a small miracle, a piece of her past salvaged from destruction. She also found her mother's recipe book, water-damaged but readable, and clutched it to her chest for a long moment before carefully setting it with her other treasures. True to his word, Yates returned just as the sun was setting, his horse loaded with supplies. He had lumber, nails, rope, tar paper, and food, flour, beans, salt pork, coffee. Nora stared at the abundance. "This must have cost a fortune," she said. "Your tin box covered most of it. The rest I added myself." He began unloading the supplies. "I cannot let you pay for my home." "Already done." He set down a heavy load of planks. "Besides, I'm not paying for your home. I'm paying for the satisfaction of seeing it built right." Over the next few weeks, Nora learned what it meant to work alongside a man like Yates Harlow. He rose with the sun and worked until it set, his powerful frame in constant motion. He taught her how to square timber, how to set a foundation stone, how to judge if a wall was true. His hands, so large and rough, could be surprisingly gentle when showing her how to hold a hammer properly or how to tie a knot that would hold under strain. They worked in companionable silence, mostly, but sometimes Nora would ask questions and Yates would answer. She learned that he had been a trapper and a scout, that he had lived in the mountains for 5 years, that he had built his own cabin with his bare hands. She learned that he could track a deer for miles, that he knew every plant that grew in the Colorado wilderness, that he had once fought off a bear with nothing but a knife. "Were you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "Fear keeps you alive if you do not let it paralyze you." She found herself watching him more and more, noticing things. The way his muscles bunched when he lifted a beam, the concentration on his face when he measured and cut, the satisfaction in his eyes when a wall went up straight and strong. He was beautiful in a raw, untamed way that made her heart race. The house began to take shape. It was smaller than the original, a simple rectangular structure, but it was solid. Yates insisted on extra bracing, on setting the foundation deeper, on making everything stronger than necessary. "This will stand against the next storm," he said firmly. One afternoon, as they were raising the roof beams, Nora lost her grip on the rope. The beam swung wildly, and she stumbled backward. Yates dropped his end and lunged forward, catching her before she fell. His arms wrapped around her waist, steadying her, and for a moment they stood frozen. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the clean sweat and pine scent that clung to him, see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "Careful," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I'm sorry. I was not paying attention." "Are you hurt?" "No. You caught me." They stayed like that a moment longer, his hands on her waist, her palms pressed against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, strong and steady. Then Yates stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should secure that beam before it falls." After that, something changed between them. The air seemed charged when they worked close together. Their hands would brush accidentally, and electricity would spark up Nora's arm. She would catch him looking at her, his gaze intense, and have to look away before she said something foolish. At night, they sat by the fire and talked. Yates told her stories about the mountains, about the animals he had seen, and the places he had been. Nora told him about her childhood, about her parents, about her dreams of making the homestead prosper. She told him things she had never told anyone, and he listened with a focus that made her feel heard in a way she never had before. "Why did you never marry?" she asked one night, emboldened by the darkness. Yates was quiet for a long time. "Never found a woman who wanted the life I lead. Most women want comfort, security, a man who comes home every night. I cannot offer that. I'm rough around the edges, Nora. Always will be." "Some women might like that," she said softly. He looked at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Maybe," he said, "but those women are rare." The house was finished in 6 weeks. Yates built her a bed frame and a table, chairs, and shelves. He rebuilt the barn, smaller but sturdy, and constructed a chicken coop. He even dug a new well when they discovered the old one had collapsed. Nora worked beside him every day, her hands blistering and then callousing, her muscles aching but growing stronger. One morning, as she was making breakfast over the fire, Yates approached her. "It is done," he said. "Your homestead is rebuilt." Nora looked up from the pan of bacon. "Already? Come see." She followed him to the house, and he opened the door with a flourish. Inside, everything was complete. The floors were swept clean, her trunk sat at the foot of the bed, her preserves lined the shelves he had built. Sunlight streamed through the new windows, making the pine walls glow golden. "It is perfect," Nora whispered. "Yates, it is perfect." "It will keep you safe," he said. "That is what matters." She turned to him, suddenly panicked. "What do you mean? Where are you going?" "Back to my cabin. My work here is done." "You are leaving?" The thought struck her like a physical blow. "But I thought—" "You thought what?" He watched her carefully. Nora struggled to find words. How could she explain that she had grown accustomed to his presence, to the sound of his voice in the morning and the comfort of his company at night? How could she tell him that she had started imagining a future where he stayed, where they built this homestead together, where she was not alone anymore? "I thought you might stay," she said finally, "at least for a while longer." Yates shook his head slowly. "Nora, I'm a mountain man. I do not belong in civilization, even one as small as a homestead. I came to help, and I have helped. Now I need to go back where I belong." "What if I do not want you to go?" The words hung between them, bold and terrifying. Yates stared at her, something raw and hungry crossing his face before he shuddered it away. "Do not say things like that," he said roughly. "You do not know what you are asking." "Yes, I do." Nora stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. "I'm asking you to stay. I'm asking you to give this a chance. I'm asking you to consider that maybe you belong here as much as you belong in those mountains." "Nora, I care about you." The confession burst out of her. "I have tried not to, tried to keep my distance, but I cannot help it. You are good and kind and strong, and when I look at the future, I cannot imagine it without you in it." Yates closed his eyes, his jaw working. "You do not want me. I am not educated like you. I do not know poetry or music or any of the things a woman like you deserves. I am rough and wild, and I would only drag you down." "A woman like me?" Nora laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yates, I am a farmer's daughter living alone on a homestead in the middle of nowhere. I do not need poetry. I need someone who understands hard work and honest living. I need someone who looks at me the way you do when you think I am not watching." His eyes snapped open. "How do I look at you?" "Like I matter," she whispered. "Like I am worth rebuilding a house for. Like I am something precious." The distance between them disappeared. Yates reached for her, his large hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "You are precious," he said, his voice raw. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. You have courage and strength and a spirit that refuses to break. When I found you in that cellar, trapped but still fighting, I knew you were special. Every day I have spent with you has only confirmed it." "Then why are you leaving?" "Because I'm scared," he admitted. "I have been alone for so long. I do not know how to be with someone, how to share a life. What if I fail you? What if I am not what you need?" Nora reached up, covering his hands with hers. "What if you are exactly what I need? What if we are what each other needs? We will not know unless we try. I have nothing to offer you but hard work and a rough life. That's all I have to offer too. We can have it together or separately. I know which I prefer." Yates searched her face, and whatever he saw, there seemed to break something open inside him. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might shatter. But when Nora wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, the gentleness gave way to something deeper, more passionate. He pulled her against his chest, and she could feel his heart racing as fast as hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I do not deserve you," he said. "That is for me to decide, and I have decided you do." He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "You are stubborn, Nora Kennedy. You have no idea. Now, will you stay?" "Yes," he said simply. "I will stay." The days that followed were the happiest Nora had ever known. Yates moved his few possessions down from his mountain cabin, and they began building a life together. They planted a fall garden, repaired fences, and prepared for winter. Yates taught Nora to shoot, to hunt, to read the weather in the clouds. She taught him to enjoy simple comforts, fresh bread, clean sheets, the pleasure of a home-cooked meal. They worked during the day and sat by the fire at night, talking or simply enjoying the quiet companionship. Sometimes Yates would reach for her hand, his rough palm engulfing hers, and they would sit like that for hours. Sometimes she would lean against him, feeling safe in a way she never had before. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Yates cleared his throat awkwardly. "I have something to ask you." Nora looked up from her mending. "What is it?" "I know we have not been together long. I know I am not the kind of man women dream about marrying, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple and silver with a small stone. "I made this from silver I panned in the mountains. It is not much, but it is honest work, and it is from my heart. Nora Kennedy, will you marry me?" Tears filled Nora's eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, deep and passionate, and she knew she was exactly where she belonged. They married in Las Animas a week later, with the preacher and a few townspeople as witnesses. Nora wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully mended where the tornado had torn it. Yates wore new clothes he had bought specially for the occasion, though he looked uncomfortable in them. When he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers. "I promise to protect you, to work beside you, to honor you all my days," he said. "I promise to be the man you deserve, even when I fall short. I promise to love you with everything I have." Nora's own vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to stand with you through every storm, to believe in you when you doubt yourself, to build a life with you that honors both our strengths. I promise to love you today, tomorrow, and always." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her so thoroughly that the townspeople cheered and whistled. Nora did not care. She was married to the man she loved, and nothing else mattered. Winter came hard that year, with snow piling high around the homestead. But inside their sturdy house, Nora and Yates were warm and content. They spent long evenings by the fire, Yates working on various projects while Nora read aloud from books they borrowed from town. He loved hearing her voice, and she loved sharing stories with him. Sometimes they would talk late into the night, sharing dreams and fears and hopes for the future. Yates proved to be a devoted husband. He was gentle with her, patient when she was learning something new, encouraging when she doubted herself. He also had a playful side that surprised her. He would sneak up behind her while she was cooking and wrap his arms around her waist, nuzzling her neck until she laughed and swatted him away. He would challenge her to snowball fights, his competitive nature emerging, and then warm her freezing hands in his when they came inside. In bed, he was passionate and tender, treating her like something precious. He took his time learning what pleased her, and she learned what made him groan and grip the sheets. They fit together perfectly, two people who had been alone finding completeness in each other. As winter turned to spring, they prepared for planting season. Yates had ideas for expanding the farm, for trying new crops, for making the homestead profitable. Nora had her own ideas, and they would debate them good-naturedly over meals, each respecting the other's opinion. They made decisions together, true partners in every sense. One morning in early summer, Nora woke feeling unwell. She barely made it outside before losing her breakfast. Yates was immediately worried, hovering over her as she sat on the porch steps. "Should I ride for the doctor?" he asked. "No, I do not think that is necessary." Nora smiled up at him, her hand moving to her stomach. "I think we are going to have a baby." Yates went very still. "A baby?" "Yes. Are you happy?" He dropped to his knees in front of her, his large hands covering hers on her stomach. "Happy? Nora, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. A baby, our baby." She laughed at his expression, so raw and honest. "You will be a wonderful father." "I do not know how to be a father." "You will learn. We will learn together." And they did. As Nora's stomach grew round with their child, Yates became even more protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy, would not let her work too hard in the heat. He built a cradle from wood he cut himself, sanding it until it was perfectly smooth, carving tiny designs into the headboard. He built extra shelves for baby clothes and blankets, prepared a corner of their bedroom for the nursery, made sure they had everything they would need. At night, he would talk to her belly, telling their unborn child stories about the mountains and promising to keep them safe always. Nora would run her fingers through his hair and feel so full of love that she thought she might burst. The baby came on a cold November night, just over a year after the tornado that had changed everything. The labor was long and difficult, but Yates never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, encouraged her when she wanted to give up. When their son finally entered the world, squalling and red-faced, Yates wept openly. "He is perfect," he said, holding the tiny bundle with shaking hands. "Nora, he is perfect." They named him Samuel, after Nora's father. He had Yates's blue eyes and Nora's dark hair, and he was the light of their lives. Yates was a devoted father, patient with the crying and the sleepless nights, marveling at every tiny milestone. He would carry Samuel around the homestead, narrating everything they saw, building a bond with his son from the very beginning. Life settled into a rhythm. The homestead prospered under their combined efforts. They added more livestock, expanded the fields, built a smokehouse and a proper barn. Yates's knowledge of the land combined with Nora's organizational skills made them successful beyond what either had dreamed. 3 years after Samuel was born, their daughter arrived. Emma had Nora's green eyes and a spirit that kept them all on their toes. She was fearless from the start, toddling after her older brother and getting into everything. Yates called her his little wildflower, and she had him wrapped around her tiny finger from day one. The years passed quickly, filled with hard work and laughter and love. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, learning to ride and hunt and work the land. Emma was equally capable, refusing to be left behind just because she was a girl. Nora and Yates taught them both to read and write, to think for themselves, to treat others with respect and kindness. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Nora would sit on the porch with Yates and watch their children play in the yard. She would think about that terrible day when the tornado destroyed everything, when she was trapped in the darkness wondering if anyone would find her. She would think about the mountain man who appeared like an answer to prayer, who rebuilt not just her house, but her entire life. "What are you thinking about?" Yates would ask, his arm around her shoulders. "About how lucky I am," she would say. "About how you saved me." "You saved me too," he would reply. "I was half alive up in those mountains, just existing. You gave me a reason to really live." They would sit like that until the stars came out, content in the life they had built together. When Samuel turned 15, he started talking about exploring beyond the homestead, about seeing what lay west in the mountains. Yates understood that restlessness, that call to adventure. He took his son on long trips into the wilderness, teaching him survival skills, showing him the cabin where he used to live alone. They would return weeks later, both of them sun-browned and smelling of pine, with stories that made Emma beg to go next time. Emma, at 12, was becoming a skilled horsewoman and an even better shot than her brother. She had her mother's determination and her father's fearlessness, a combination that both thrilled and terrified her parents. When she announced she wanted to learn to rope cattle like the cowboys who sometimes passed through, Yates taught her himself, pride shining in his eyes. One afternoon, as Nora was hanging laundry, a familiar sound made her freeze. In the distance, she could hear the rumble of thunder, see the greenish tint to the sky that meant dangerous weather. Her heart began to race, memories of that long-ago tornado flooding back. Yates was beside her instantly, having seen the same signs. "Kids!" he bellowed. "Get to the cellar now!" Samuel and Emma came running from the barn. They had grown up hearing the story of how their parents met, knew the importance of storm safety. They scrambled down into the cellar that Yates had enlarged and reinforced years ago. Nora followed, her hands shaking, but Yates gripped her shoulders firmly. "I am here," he said. "We are safe. I built this house to withstand anything, and I will not let anything happen to our family." The storm passed over them, violent but brief. When they emerged, the homestead stood strong. Not a single shingle had blown off the roof. The barn was intact. Everything Yates had built held firm. "You see," he said, pulling Nora close, "we are safe. You are safe. I promise to protect you, and I always will." More years passed. Samuel eventually did head west for a few years, sending letters that Nora treasured and worried over in equal measure. He returned when he was 20, ready to settle down, with a bride he had met in Denver. Emma married at 23, a rancher's son who had proven himself worthy by treating her as an equal partner. Both children built homes near the original homestead, creating a family compound that grew and prospered. Nora and Yates became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They aged together, Yates's hair going silver, but his strength never quite fading, Nora's face lined with laugh lines earned over decades of happiness. They still worked the homestead, though their children tried to convince them to take it easier. "I was born working," Yates would say. "I will die working." On their 30th anniversary, Yates surprised Nora with a trip back to the spot where he had first found her trapped in the cellar. The original cellar was still there, though everything around it had changed. They stood hand in hand, looking at the thriving community their family had become. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked, "giving up your solitary life in the mountains?" Yates turned to her, his blue eyes still as striking as they had been 3 decades before. "Not for one single second. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be better than I was. You gave me love. How could I ever regret that?" "I love you," she said, the words as true as the first time she spoke them. "I love you too. Always have, from the moment I heard you calling for help from that cellar. Always will, until the day I die and beyond." They kissed, a long, slow kiss full of 30 years of love and partnership and devotion. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Yates said, leading her back toward home. "I want to spend the rest of the day with my wife." They walked together across the land they had built from ruins, past the house that had stood strong against every storm, toward the family gathered for their anniversary celebration. Their children and grandchildren were waiting, a legacy of love that had started with a tornado and a mountain man and a woman who refused to give up. As they approached the house, their grandson ran up to Yates. "Grandpa, will you tell us the story again, about how you found Grandma?" Yates scooped the boy up with ease despite his age. "Again? I just told you last week. Please? It is the best story ever. Yates glanced at Nora, who nodded with a smile. So he settled on the porch with his grandson on his lap and the rest of the family gathering around, and began the story they all loved to hear. Deke, it was the spring of 1877, he said, and a tornado had torn through the prairie like the wrath of God himself. Nora listened to her husband tell their story, watched their family hang on every word, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. Everything she had lost in that tornado had been returned tenfold. She had a husband who loved her unconditionally, children who made her proud, grandchildren who filled her days with joy, and great-grandchildren who represented a future full of hope. The years continued to pass peacefully. Yates and Nora settled into a comfortable routine, spending their mornings working in the garden and their afternoons visiting with family, or sitting on their porch watching the world go by. They still held hands constantly, still stole kisses when they thought no one was watching, still looked at each other with the same love and devotion they had felt as newlyweds. One spring morning, when Nora was 70 and Yates was 73, they decided to ride out to the eastern boundary of their land, something they had not done in years. The ride was longer than Nora remembered, but Yates was patient, keeping his horse slow beside hers. When they reached the spot, they dismounted and looked out over the prairie. "Remember when all this was just wild grass and hope?" Yates asked. "I remember everything," Nora said. "Every moment with you is burned into my memory." They spent the afternoon there, reminiscing and planning and simply being together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Yates pulled Nora into his arms and began to sway, dancing to music only they could hear. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "Dancing with my wife. Is that a crime? We have no music. We have the wind and the birds and our hearts beating together. That is music enough." So they danced on the prairie, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of destruction and built something beautiful together. They danced until the stars came out, until they were both breathless and laughing, until Yates finally swept Nora up into his arms and carried her to her horse. "I can walk," she protested. "I know, but I like carrying you. Makes me feel young again." They rode home in the moonlight, comfortable silence between them. When they reached the house, their daughter Emma was waiting on the porch, concern on her face. "We were about to send out a search party," she said. "It is late." "We were just enjoying the evening," Yates said, helping Nora down from her horse. Emma studied them both, then smiled. "You two are impossible." "Impossibly in love," Nora corrected, and Yates squeezed her hand in agreement. More years passed and their golden anniversary approached. The family planned a huge celebration, inviting everyone from miles around. Yates grumbled about the fuss, but Nora could see he was secretly pleased. He had come so far from the solitary mountain man who avoided society. Now he was surrounded by people who loved him, and he had learned to not just accept it, but to embrace it. On the morning of their 50th anniversary, Nora woke to find Yates already up, sitting by the window and watching the sunrise. She joined him, settling into the chair beside his. 50 years, she said softly. "Can you believe it?" "Feels like 50 days and 50 lifetimes all at once," Yates replied. He reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Best 50 years of my life." "Mine too." They sat together watching the sun paint the sky, thinking about all they had experienced together. The good times and the hard times, the laughter and the tears, the triumphs and the setbacks. Through it all, they had faced everything side by side, their love the foundation that never cracked. The celebration that night was joyous. Family came from all over Colorado and beyond. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Speeches were made, toasts were offered, and more than a few tears were shed. When it came time for Yates and Nora to speak, Yates stood and pulled his wife up beside him. "I am not good with words," he began, his voice still strong despite his 73 years. "Never have been. But I want you all to know that this woman beside me is the reason I am standing here today. She gave me a life I never dreamed possible. She gave me a family when I thought I would always be alone. She gave me love when I did not know I needed it." He turned to Nora, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "You are my heart, Nora Harlow. You have been since the day I pulled you from that cellar. You will be until my last breath and beyond. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for 50 years of happiness." Nora was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe away the tears. "Thank you for finding me," she said. "Thank you for rebuilding not just my house but my entire life. Thank you for being the man I needed, exactly when I needed him. I love you, Yates Harlow. I will love you always." They kissed to thunderous applause, and then the party continued late into the night. Yates danced with Nora, with their daughters and granddaughters, even with his great-granddaughter who stood on his boots while he waltzed her around the yard. He was smiling the entire time, truly happy in a way that still amazed him sometimes. Later, when the party had wound down and most guests had gone home, Yates and Nora walked out to look at the homestead under the stars. The original house he had rebuilt still stood, though they had added on over the years. The barn was in its third iteration, each one larger than the last. The fields stretched out in all directions, productive and well-maintained. "We built something good here," Yates said. "We did," Nora agreed, "together. Always together." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, comfortable in the silence. This was what love looked like after 50 years. Not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but quiet moments of contentment, the security of knowing someone would always be there, the peace of a life well lived together. The years continued to pass gently. Yates and Nora slowed down gradually, spending more time sitting and talking than working, though they still insisted on helping where they could. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, marveling at how their love had created this vast, sprawling family. One autumn afternoon, when Yates was 78 and Nora was 75, they decided to visit the spot one more time, the place where it all began. Their grandson drove them in a wagon, and they walked slowly to where the old cellar still stood, now mostly collapsed with age. "Right here," Nora said, pointing. "This is where I was trapped." "And this is where I found you," Yates added, standing beside her. Their grandson listened as they recounted the story once more, adding details they had never mentioned before. How scared Nora had been, how determined Yates had been to help her, how neither of them had expected to fall in love, but could not seem to help themselves. "That is what I want," their grandson said when they finished. "A love like yours." "Then find someone who makes you want to be better," Yates advised. "Someone who sees the real you and loves you anyway. Someone who stands beside you in the storms instead of running away. That is real love. And be willing to work for it," Nora added. "Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every day to honor and respect and care for your partner. Choose right, and it gets easier with practice." They returned home as the sun was setting, and Nora made Yates his favorite meal: venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the company. After dinner, they sat by the fire as they had thousands of times before, Yates in his chair and Nora beside him, her hand in his. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Nora asked. "After you pulled me from the cellar?" "I said a lot of things." "You said, 'I have you.' Those 3 words meant everything to me. They still do." Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I still have you. Always will." They sat there until the fire burned low, then helped each other up to bed. Their bedroom was cozy and familiar, filled with memories of a lifetime together. They settled under the quilts, Yates wrapping his arms around Nora like he did every night, holding her close. "Good night, my love," Nora whispered. "Good night, sweetheart," Yates replied. They fell asleep like that, together as they had been for over 50 years, as they would be for whatever time remained to them. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, gentle now, as if even nature approved of what they had built here. The homestead stood strong and solid, a testament to what 2 people could create when they worked together with love as their foundation. In the years that followed, Yates and Nora continued to be the heart of their family. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, welcomed new babies and mourned losses, offered advice when asked, and kept quiet when not. They were the living proof that love could endure, that commitment meant something, that building a life with someone was worth every challenge and hardship along the way. When Yates was 81, he began to slow down noticeably. His steps became more careful, his movements more deliberate, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Nora never wavered. He still reached for her hand first thing in the morning, still told her she was beautiful, still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Nora, at 78, matched his pace, content to grow old beside the man she loved. They spent their days in simple pleasures, sitting in the sun, tending a small garden, playing with their great-great-grandchildren who were beginning to arrive. Their conversations were rich with memories and comfortable silences, the communication of two people who knew each other so well that words were often unnecessary. One spring evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Yates turned to Nora with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Nora asked, concerned by his tone. "I am not afraid of dying," he said slowly. "But I am afraid of leaving you. The thought of you being alone, of not being here to hold your hand or fix whatever needs fixing, it tears me up inside." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "Yates Harlow, do not talk like that." "I have to. I'm 81, Nora. I've lived a long, full life. But I need you to know that if I go first, you will be okay. You are the strongest woman I know. You survived that tornado, survived losing your parents, survived being alone. You will survive losing me, too. I do not want to survive without you. I want us to be together." "We will be," Yates said firmly. "If I go first, I will wait for you. And if you go first, I will follow as soon as I can. Either way, we will be together again. That is a promise." They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, both aware that time was becoming more precious with each passing day. But they did not dwell on sadness. Instead, they chose to cherish every moment they still had, to make the most of the time remaining. Yates lived to be 84, remaining active and engaged until the very end. One October morning, he did not wake up. He passed peacefully in his sleep, Nora beside him, as she had been every night of their marriage. The family gathered to mourn a man who had been a pillar of strength, a source of wisdom, a loving husband and father and grandfather. The funeral was attended by hundreds, testimony to the impact Yates Harlow had made on the community he once avoided. Nora grieved deeply, but she did not break. She had Yates's strength inside her now, woven into her very being after more than 50 years together. She continued to live on the homestead, surrounded by family, finding comfort in memories and in the legacy they had built together. She would often sit on the porch in Yates's chair, looking out over the land they had tended together, and feel his presence. Sometimes she talked to him, telling him about the family, about the homestead, about how much she missed him. She would remember his laugh, his touch, the way he said her name. She would remember the mountain man who had found her in the cellar and rebuilt everything, who had loved her with a devotion that never wavered. 3 years after Yates passed, on a quiet spring morning, very similar to the one when they met, Nora died peacefully in her sleep. Her family found her with a smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful in her final moments. They buried her beside Yates, their headstone simple but eloquent. Yates Harlow, 1796-1880, beloved husband, father, builder of dreams, Nora Kennedy. Harlow, 1799-1883, beloved wife, mother, keeper of hearts. The homestead remained in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, a physical reminder of what two people had created from destruction and determination. The story of Yates and Nora became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, an inspiration and a blueprint for what true love looked like. The old cellar eventually collapsed completely, reclaimed by the earth. But where it had stood, the family planted a garden, beautiful and thriving, because that spot represented not an ending but a beginning. It was where Nora had been trapped in darkness and where Yates had brought her into the light. It was where two souls had found each other against all odds and built something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. Every year on their anniversary, the family would gather at that spot for a celebration. They would share the story of how it all began: the tornado, the mountain man, the woman who refused to give up. They would talk about rebuilding, about second chances, about how sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best outcomes. They would honor Yates and Nora by living the values they had exemplified: hard work, devotion, courage, and above all, love. The homestead stood strong for over a century, just as Yates had promised it would. Even when newer, more modern homes were built around it, the original house remained carefully maintained by family members who understood its significance. It was more than just wood and nails. It was a monument to what two people could accomplish when they worked together, when they loved fiercely, when they refused to let circumstances defeat them. Inside that house, if you listened carefully on quiet nights, some family members swore they could hear echoes of the past. Yates's deep laugh, Nora's gentle voice, the sounds of a life well lived. The floorboards Yates had laid with his own hands still supported the weight of his descendants. The walls he had raised still sheltered those who carried his blood. The foundation he had set with such care still held strong against every storm. The story of Yates and Nora Harlow became more than just family history. It became a legend in Las Animas, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, that strangers could become saviors, that love could bloom in the ruins of disaster, that a mountain man and a farmer's daughter could build an empire from nothing but determination and devotion. Their great-great-great-grandchildren would eventually spread across the country, carrying pieces of their story with them. Some became builders like Yates, finding satisfaction in creating with their hands. Some became farmers like Nora, nurturing growth from the earth. All of them carried the legacy of strength and love that their ancestors had established on that Colorado prairie so many years ago. And on stormy nights when the wind howled across the plains and dark clouds gathered on the horizon, the descendants of Yates and Nora Harlow would gather their families close, seek shelter in strong houses, and remember the story of the tornado and the cellar and the mountain man who rebuilt everything. They would remember that destruction is not the end, that being trapped is temporary, that help often comes from unexpected places. They would remember that love can survive anything, even death itself, living on in the hearts and memories of those left behind. The homestead stood as proof that from the worst devastation, the most beautiful things could grow. That a woman trapped in darkness could find light, that a man who thought he belonged alone could find belonging, that two hearts, beating as one, could create a legacy that would endure for generations. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Yates and Nora Harlow were together again, walking hand in hand through eternal prairies under endless skies, their love story complete, but never truly ending. They had built something in their lives that transcended time and death, a family, a home, a love that would inspire others for generations to come. That was their true legacy, more enduring than any house or land or possessions. They had proven that when two people commit to each other fully, when they work side by side through every challenge, when they choose love every single day, they can create something that lasts forever, not just in buildings and land, but in hearts and memories and in the very fabric of the family they created. The tornado had taken everything from Nora Kennedy in a matter of minutes, but in doing so, it had brought Yates Harlow into her life, and together they had rebuilt not just a house, not just a homestead, but an entire world. A world founded on love, strengthened by commitment, and preserved through generations of descendants who understood that the greatest inheritance they had received was not land or money, but the example of two people who had loved each other without reservation, without condition, without end. That was the story of Yates and Nora Harlow. That was the legacy they left behind, and that was the gift they gave to everyone who heard their story. The knowledge that true love exists, that it can survive anything, and that with the right person beside you, you can rebuild anything that life tears down. All you need is courage, commitment, and someone willing to dig you out of the darkness and stand with you in the light.